What if everything you thought you knew about where humans came from was incomplete?
Or maybe even, profoundly misunderstood in some really fundamental ways.
Exactly. For decades, we've sort of been taught this single, clear, linear story about humanity's origins. But imagine finding evidence that just, well, turns that whole narrative on its head
Suggesting our story is far more complex, multi-layered.
and involves places you might not expect, right?
Precisely.
And look, this isn't about just minor tweaks to the timeline. This is about shaking the very foundation of our understanding of Homo sapien.
A reevaluation driven by some really groundbreaking discoveries. Some as recent as 2024, actually.
Yeah, really recent. So today, we're taking a deep dive into this extraordinary collection of sources that seriously challenge the prevailing out-of-Africa theory.
And we're focusing on the compelling, complex, and I think often overlooked role Europe might have played.
In the evolution of our own species, Homo sapiens, we'll unpack arguments for significant European contributions.
Using archaeology, paleontology, ancient DNA, the whole toolkit.
Helping you understand how our picture of human origins is being, well, dramatically reshaped. Okay, so let's set the stage first. For a long time, the dominant narrative, the out-of-Africa theory, or OOA,
Yeah, that one's pretty familiar to most people, I think.
it painted a clear picture, right? Homo sapiens originated exclusively in Africa maybe 300,000 to 200,000 years ago.
hmm
Then one main group leaves East Africa around, say, 70,000 to 50,000 years ago.
And basically replaces other archaic hominins like the Neanderthals in Europe. Clean sweep, almost.
And genetics, especially things like mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome, seem to back this up.
Right. The idea being that the greater genetic diversity in Africa points to it being the oldest home base.
What if that clear picture isn't quite the whole story?
Well, that's exactly where it gets fascinating. This field, human origins, it's just so dynamic. Continuous advancements, new digs, better analysis, and especially ancient DNA research.
Ancient DNA has been a game changer.
Absolutely. It's increasingly challenging that strict replacement idea. So it raises this really important question.
Right.
What if our evolutionary path was, I don't know, more intricate, more multi-regional?
More interactive.
Exactly. Interactive is a great word for it. The old idea of Homo sapiens as this pure species that just marched out and took over.
Yeah, that's falling apart a bit.
It really is. Genomic evidence now shows pretty significant interbreeding with other Homo species, Neanderthals, Denisovans. It suggests more of a mosaic origin for us modern humans.
A mosaic, I like that.
And this evolving picture, it forces us to reevaluate Europe's role. It wasn't just a destination for African migrants. It was a region with its own deep evolutionary history.
A history that actively interacted with and maybe contributed to our lineage.
That's the argument, yes.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty radical shift.
Well,
So where do we start seeing the evidence for this? Where do the cracks appear in that old narrative?
to really get it, we need to go deep. Deep underground in Spain, actually, to a site called Sima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones.
The Pit of Bones. Sounds dramatic.
It is. It's incredible. It gives us this unparalleled window into the Middle Pleistocene, about 430,000 years ago. Over 7,000 fossils found there, from at least 28, maybe 29 individuals,
Wow, all from one place.
all from this one deep cave shaft. And what they found there really started to change things.
So who were these individuals? Proto-Neanderthals. What do they tell us?
Well, they're classified as pre-Neanderthals, or definitely part of that early Neanderthal family tree. They're clade. They showed this mix of traits, some classic Neanderthal features like the brow ridges, the teeth, but also some older, more archaic features. Their brain size, around 1,240 cc, is kind of on the low end for later Neanderthals.
Okay.
And maybe even hints of early symbolic behavior there, too. Early thought, language, very tentative but suggestive.
But the big takeaway from Sima.
The big takeaway is that it firmly roots the Neanderthal lineage deep in European soil, 430,000 years ago.
So Europe was a major center for Neanderthal evolution way before Homo sapiens even show up in the African record as we knew it then.
Exactly. Long before. But the DNA from these Sima fossils added another twist.
Right, you mentioned DNA. What did it reveal?
Well, initially, people often lumped them into Homo heidelbergensis. This species thought maybe to be a common ancestor for both us and the Neanderthals.
Okay.
But then a huge DNA study in 2016, looking at nuclear DNA, the DNA from the cell nucleus, it confirmed these Sima folks were the oldest known Neanderthals, or proto-Neanderthals, right on that line.
The oldest, so that pushed back the timeline for Neanderthals.
It did. It pushed back their split from another archaic group, the Denisovans, to at least 430,000 years ago. But here's the weird part. Earlier studies, looking just at mitochondrial DNA.
Passed down the maternal line, right?
Correct. That mtDNA actually suggested a closer link to Denisovans, not Neanderthals, even though their bones look Neanderthal-ish.
Huh. That sounds confusing.
It was. This discrepancy points to a really complex relationship back then, maybe an early split, intricate gene flow between Proto-Neanderthals and Denisovans. It suggests that braided stream idea of evolution was happening very early on.
Not clean splits, but connections and mixing.
Exactly. So Sima establishes this deep European Neanderthal presence, which is crucial if you want to argue for a European contribution to us, because it sets up later interactions, not just replacement.
Okay, fascinating. Europe's got its own complex story unfolding. Let's swing back to Africa, though. Jebel Irhoud in Morocco. How did that site challenge things?
Right, Jebel Irhoud. That one initially stumped researchers, too. The first finds, people thought they might be Neanderthals. They found tools often linked with Neanderthals, and the bones had some archaic features.
But they weren't.
Nope. A big reevaluation in 2017 completely changed their classification and their date.
Okay, so what were they and how old?
They were reclassified as early Homo sapiens. And the shocker was the age pushed way back to around 300,000 years ago.
300,000. Wow, that makes them the earliest Homo sapiens we know of, doesn't it?
By about 100,000 years, yes. Earliest known.
But you said they had archaic features. They weren't quite like us.
That's the key thing. They are Homo sapiens, but they show this mosaic of primitive and modern traits. Their faces looked quite modern, but they had larger jaws, longer, more archaic-looking brain cases in the back, and crucially, some features, like a specific bulge on the side of the skull, actually look quite similar to Neanderthals.
Okay, hold on. Early Homo sapiens in Africa, 300,000 years ago, but with Neanderthal-like features. What does that mean?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It could just reflect shared traits from an even earlier ancestor like Homo heidelbergensis. Both groups inherited them.
Or
It could hint at very early, previously unrecognized gene flow, way back before 300,000 years ago, maybe between ancestral sapiens in North Africa and early Neanderthals or Proto-Neanderthals in Europe or the Near East.
So even at that super early stage, the groups might not have been totally isolated.
It certainly challenges the strict separate boxes idea of the out-of-Africa narrative. It suggests interconnectedness, even way back then. Blurs the lines.
Okay, fossils are one thing, but genetics. You said ancient DNA is where the really undeniable proof of interaction comes in.
Oh, absolutely. The conclusive genetic evidence for interbreeding between Homo sapiens and other archaic humans, Neanderthals and Denisovans, that's been a massive breakthrough. It's not a theory anymore. It's literally written in our genomes.
So many people listening right now are carrying bits of Neanderthal DNA.
That's right. If your ancestry is primarily non-African, you likely have between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA.
1 to 4%. That's significant.
It is. And it's not just junk DNA. These introgressed genes, the ones we kept, often seem to have been beneficial. They helped adapting to new environments outside Africa, things related to skin pigmentation, immunity, maybe even how our nervous systems work.
Like a genetic toolkit from our ancient cousins.
Kind of, yeah. And recent work, like analyzing DNA from Homo sapiens fossils found in Rennes, Germany, dated to about 45,000 years ago. That's helped pinpoint a major interbreeding period to somewhere between 45,000 and 50,000 years ago.
So we know when a big chunk of this mixing happened. But wasn't it just a one-way street? Sapiens picking up Neanderthal genes as they moved out?
That was the initial thought, mostly. But there's an even more surprising twist in the genetic tale. It involves the Y chromosome, the one passed down from father to son. It turns out the Neanderthal Y chromosome seems genetically closer to the Homo sapiens Y chromosome than it is to the Denisovan Y chromosome.
Wait, how does that work? They should be closer to Denisovans, right?
You'd think so. It's seen as this sort of weird genetic anomaly. The interpretation is that at some point, a Homo sapiens Y chromosome got introduced into the Neanderthal gene pool.
Our Y chromosome went into them?
Yes. And then it seems it underwent strong positive selection. It spread rapidly among Neanderthals.
Whoa, so let me get this straight. Not only did we pick up their genes, but our genes flowed into them and were actually favored, selected for.
That's what the evidence suggests. This bidirectional flow, gene flow going both ways. It points towards sustained contact, real interaction, maybe periods of coexistence, cultural exchange, not just brief encounters followed by replacement.
Where would this have happened?
The Middle East is often flagged as a likely zone for these kinds of prolonged interactions.
And this supports the idea of a partial evolution in Europe.
It directly supports it. It shows European archaic humans weren't just a dead end that got replaced. They actively contributed to shaping us, our genetics, our adaptations.
Okay, this strict out of Africa replacement model is definitely looking shaky, but you mentioned some hypotheses go even further, even more radical.
Uh-huh. Some researchers propose ideas that really flip the script, like the out-of-Eurasia hypothesis.
Out of Eurasia, as in Homo sapiens originating there.
That's the core idea, yes.
Yeah.
OOEH, for short. It proposes that recent humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, actually originated somewhere in Eurasia and then dispersed from there, including dispersing back into Africa.
Back into Africa. Wow. Okay, what's the evidence for such a radical idea?
Well, proponents point to a few things. One is complex analysis of mitochondrial DNA again. They argue it shows African populations are paraphyletic. Basically, they don't all cluster together exclusively, suggesting Africa might not be the single point of origin.
But what about the higher genetic diversity in Africa? Isn't that the classic proof for OOA?
OAH reinterprets that. They suggest the higher diversity in Africa is actually the result of multiple waves of Homo sapiens dispersing from Eurasia into Africa over time, while Eurasian populations went through bottlenecks, reducing their diversity.
Okay, that's a different way of looking at it. What else?
A key piece for OEH is evidence suggesting Homo sapiens mtDNA got into Neanderthals way back, maybe around 500,000 years ago. Since Neanderthals are Eurasian, this implies sapiens were also in Eurasia very early, coexisting with them.
500,000 years ago. That's incredibly early for sapiens.
It is. And there's some fossil evidence cited, too. Fossils from China, like Dali and Jinyushan, dated around 250,000 to 270,000 years ago, claim to be early sapiens, predating the usual out-of-Africa migration date.
And what about Europe itself? Any super early sapiens fossils there?
Yes. This is another bombshell. Apodema Cave in Greece, a fossil called Apodema 1. It's been dated to over 210,000 years ago.
210,000 years ago in Greece.
In Greece. And early Homo sapiens is the earliest direct evidence of our species in Europe by a massive margin, over 150,000 years earlier than we thought.
So how does that fit? Is it seen as just an early failed migration from Africa?
That's often how it's framed within the OOA model. A small group got out early but died out. But from out of Eurasia perspective, it's just more evidence that Homo sapiens were already present within Eurasia much earlier than the standard narrative allows.
Okay, that's already shaking things up considerably. But you mentioned a discovery from just last year, 2024, that goes even deeper.
Ah, yes. This one is truly mind-bending. It potentially rewrites the very, very beginning of the story. It's about a fossil ape called Antediluvius turkey, found in Turkey, dated to 8.7 million years ago.
8.7 million. We're talking pre-human ancestors now, right? Early apes.
Exactly. The group that includes African apes and humans, called hominines. The long-held belief is that this group evolved solely in Africa.
Right, that's the standard textbook version.
But Antediluvius challenges that directly, finding this advanced early ape in Turkey 8.7 million years ago. It adds substantial weight to an alternative theory, that the ancestors of African apes and humans might have actually evolved in Europe first.
Evolved in Europe, and then migrated to Africa.
Migrated to Africa maybe between 9 and 7 million years ago. That's the implication.
So the whole lineage, the group that eventually leads to us, might have started diversifying in Europe before anyone set foot in Africa.
It suggests the entire hominine group could have evolved and diversified in Europe before that later dispersal into Africa. It fundamentally reshapes where our deepest roots might lie.
That's staggering. Not just a European role in Homo sapiens evolution, but potentially in the origin of our entire ape lineage.
It's a profound possibility raised by this 2024 discovery, yes.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. We have Sima showing deep Neanderthal roots in Europe. We have Jebel Irhoud in Africa showing very early Homo sapiens, but with Neanderthal-like traits, hinting at connections.
Right, very early complexity.
We have the undeniable gene flow going both ways between sapiens and Neanderthals.
Written in our DNA.
We have Apodema 1 showing sapiens in Europe over 200,000 years ago.
Challenging the timelines.
We have the out of Eurasia hypothesis questioning the very direction of dispersal.
A radical alternative, yes.
And now Antediluvius turkey suggesting the deepest hominine roots might even lie outside Africa.
Putting Europe potentially at the very base of our broader family tree.
It really does paint a picture, not of a simple tree, but like you said, a dynamic, multi-directional, interconnected, braided stream.
Precisely. That's the emerging picture. It's not about replacing out of Africa entirely, maybe. Africa is still clearly central to the species Homo sapiens emerging. But the strict replacement model, That's just not sufficient anymore.
It's too simple.
Way too simple. Europe wasn't just a passive recipient. The Sima evidence shows it was a crucible for Neanderthal evolution, setting up that leader interaction. Jebel Irhoud hints at very early cross-continental links or deep shared ancestry. The Neanderthal DNA in us is direct proof of a European contribution to our makeup. And that Y chromosome swap shows complex two-way traffic.
Yeah, the Y chromosome thing is wild.
Isn't it? And apodema 1, combined with OOEH ideas, suggests Europe might have been a region of significant hominin activity and diversification for a very long time. And then Andaluvius. Well, that potentially pushes a European contribution right back to the dawn of our lineage.
So the big picture is shifting towards multi-regional contribution, different populations interacting, mixing.
I think that's a good way to put it. A multi-regional contribution to modern human origins. Different Homo groups across continents weren't totally isolated. They met, they exchanged genes, they perhaps exchanged culture. And all of that collectively contributed to the adaptable, diverse species we are today.
It makes our history feel much more interconnected, doesn't it? A shared journey across continents, across deep time.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it's exciting because the field is constantly changing. New discoveries will keep refining this picture.
It's definitely not a closed book.
Not at all.
So, wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you listening right now? This deep dive really shows that the story of us isn't that simple straight line we learned. It's this complex, tangled, braided river. How does thinking about our ancient past, this way more integrated, more interconnected across continents, maybe even originating differently than we thought, how does that change how you see human identity?
Does it make you feel more connected, perhaps, to all of humanity, knowing our roots are so deeply intertwined across place and time?
Something to think about. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, never stop being curious about this incredible and still unfolding journey that brought us all here.